Hello everyone and welcome to this CAP Devtoberfest session. My name is Martin Stenzig and I work for a company called Rizing. To begin with, I would like to thank the developer advocates for having me, but even more so for doing a fantastic job of continuously educating all of us in the SAP developer community. When I was asked to host this session, I came back to an idea I had tossing around for a while. Can I show how to build an end-to-end BTP extension app with CAP and Node.js in its core in 1 hour? As for the background, I think we're all facing the fact that SAP development is usually not associated with the fastest development cycles. And we probably all have heard statements like, yeah, I could do that, but not in SAP. So let's correct this perception and show what we can do in an hour. I plan to fly through the 1 hour development here on my machine without going into too much details. For that, I've enlisted the support of the developer advocates that are standing by to help you answering all the questions that you might have in the chat. So let's get started. Let me switch my screen around. So now you should see my development screen and a little timer. Let's start the timer on the 1 hour mark. So above there, you will see 59 minutes. With that, last thing here, let me put my glasses on and we're going into it. The business request. So the business request we came up with was a university maintenance department requests an application to easily enter facility problems into a BTP-based app that in itself is connected to SAP. So that application should store the problem in a database and immediately create a maintenance notification in SAP to start the overall maintenance process. Certain assumptions. We have the necessary BTP entitlements and the respective cloud credits. So you see the list down there. We have an SAP sub-account set up. We have the single sign-on set up. HANA is set up as a database. One important piece here is we also have a destination set up. In my case, that's S4V UI runtime, which I will come back to later. We're utilizing Fiori Elements as a user interface and CAP Node.js as a runtime. The information is ultimately stored in a HANA Cloud database, but for local development and testing, I will use an SQLite. So let's start with this. What I will do is I will copy this repo and clone this repo in my local environment. Git clone, here we go, Devtober, here we go, and I'm using VS Code as my development environment. So in here in VS Code, I will open up a couple of terminals. I will use one and or two over time, so we'll get to use that. To start out with, what I want to do is I want to initialize my project just by running CDS init. CDS init is creating the basic setup of everything we need for a CAP project. 3 folders. We'll probably look into some of the detailed folders later on, but that's sort of the starting point. In order to create an OData service, and that's sort of the first part of my 4-part approach here, is to build an OData service. An OData service usually comes with a data model. So what I'm going to do is I'm creating a file in my DB folder that I call core CDS. That file contains a namespace, and in my case, I will use riz.devtober as my namespace. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to create an entity. The entity here is called my maintenance item. And that entity should have at its core a couple of fields. The first one is a problem description. Problem description is a string. Let's make it 5,000 characters just because, it might be pretty verbose. And then the other thing that I certainly need here is my S4 ID, and that is good as the string 50. So the S4 ID is the notification ID I will ultimately receive back from SAP once the SAP document has been created, and I want to store it in my table. Now, what I'm missing in this entity is the key entity. So I don't want to use this S4 ID as a key because initially it might not exist. So I want something that I can utilize for various purposes. So at the end of the day, I'm looking for a field ID that is a UUID. I'm also looking for a couple of other fields like the created at, created on, created by date fields. Now, rather than specifying them explicitly, what I can do is CAP has this wonderful vehicle called annotations that I can make use of. So ultimately, by specifying two things, CUID and managed in here, it will add additional fields, the ID that you've just seen, and then created at, created by, changed at, or updated at, updated by as additional fields. Now, you see here with the crinkles underneath GUI and managed, something is still missing. What is missing is I need to refer to, I need to reference these from the standard SAP CAP package, that is SAP CDS common. So with that, we have our data model defined. Now, when I save this, you still get the message down here in my watch terminal that says no service definition found. That's sort of the piece that we're going to rectify right now. Next step is to create another file called admin CDS. In admin CDS, we want to do our service definition. The service definition here is for my admin service. So my admin service definition is essentially the shell of my OData service. Now, how do I expose one-to-one that data model that I have just created through that service? I'll do the following. So first, I use the using example again. And here I use a reference to my namespace. And I essentially put an alias on it. And I'll say RISDevTober is equal to my, and we're using that from my core database service. So now, once I have done that, and I put a semicolon behind it, I can, in this, do an entity projection. So here, all I have to say is entity maintenance item on projection on my maintenance item, and what the result is a service that I've spun up that is now available at OData v4 admin on my local machine that exposes exactly this OData service. So let's see whether or not we can actually get to it. So let me pull in a browser here, localhost 4004, and localhost 4004 shows you the standard page that CAP provides you in order to give you a development entry page for checking your core pieces. If I click on maintenance item, you see a couple of things. You see the standard OData v4 response, with a value element, but you also see that in my terminal down here, the request actually went to the server, did a full round trip, and responded with the values. So that is the way that I can see it in the browser itself. But let's check whether or not it only can provide me with a read response, or whether or not I can actually also write to it. So what I usually do for services like this, I create a test folder. And given that I have the VS Code REST client installed, I create a file with the extension .http. What I can do in this file is a variety of things. The first thing is I can specify variables. So let's say server is HTTP localhost 4004, and the service is whatever we have down here, my path. So that's my admin service. So in order to call this, what I can specify here in this HTTP REST client is server service. Let's start with that. Voila, here we see that my service has one entity, my maintenance item, and as soon as I put my maintenance item behind it, I get my the same result that I actually saw in the server. So that is looking very good already. So how do I test my create? So what I will do is I will just specify the content type application JSON. All I want to specify here is the problem description. description, set that to test, and let's see what we get. A 201, so we successfully entered this record in the system. Back to what I said earlier about the aspects, what you see here is the result. Yeah? So not only do I get my problem description stored in the database, I obviously also have an empty S4 ID value because that's set to null, but I also have these other fields that I mentioned before. ID, because I specified CUID as an aspect, that is automatically pre-filled with a valid UUID, and then created, add created by, modified add, modified by, that are currently set to anonymous. Exactly what I wanted, and with that I have my starting point. I have an OData service within the first 10 minutes of our exciting journey here that allows me to write information into the database, read information into the database. Granted, at this point in time, it's just an SQLite database, but it's a good place to start. So with that, let's save everything, close everything, and commit this to the database. So OData model. All right, stage the changes, commit them. Done with part one. So what's part two? Part two is, in part two, we want to put a user interface on top of all of this. Now, how do I do that? I actually prefer to use a Fiori Elements or an application generator. So SAP has done, the Fiori team has done a great job of putting that together. So in here, you can use Command-Shift-P once you have the necessary extension installed in order to open up the Fiori application generator. That is the tool, as I said, of my choice that I will use right now. It has a variety of selections here. The first one I want is SAP Fiori is certainly the right type. The next thing that I want to select is the list report page, because the information I have can be easily visualized in sort of the classic master detailed fashion. And frankly, I mean, in probably 60 to 70% of our applications that we're developing for customers or even for ourselves, that standard list report page is sort of a pattern that works pretty well. Data sources. You have various choices here. I want to use my local CAP project, and obviously the CAP project is my DevTober project. The OData service is my admin service. So all those selected, jumping to next. My maintenance item is correct. And yes, I want to automatically add the table columns that I have in the service to my output page. So here in the project attributes, I want to specify a few things. The first one is the module name. Now the module name is relevant because it is used to generate or to create the name of the folder that this particular Fiori app is put in. So I want to have admin app, something that is self-explanatory yet short. In my Rizing, my application namespace, what I usually do is I use my regular namespace that I used in the model, and I put a UI behind it. But again, there are probably application UI developers that are much more versatile on that. The only other thing I want to change here is I want to add my Fiori Launchpad configuration to it, because I want to make sure is that my Launchpad or my application can be used in a standard Fiori Launchpad as well, and I don't have to jump through other hoops. So in here, for the Launchpad configuration, we want to specify the semantic object, the action, a title, maintenance notification, let's call it custom, and the subtitle is manage. And with that, hit the finish button. So what is happening now is the Fiori Elements application generator creates all kinds of artifacts that are essentially representing the scaffolding of that Fiori application. So that is a very good starting point. And let's see what it did and what it does for me. Yeah? So a few things. So first of all, you have the application information in here. The second thing is you saw down here in my terminal that my application reset, and it now has, well, you didn't see anything different, but if we're going to my browser, let's move on this other browser over here. and we're refreshing our start page, what we should see is now a web application showing up. So if I click on this web application, we're seeing, voila, already a pretty good starting point. There are a few things that sort of I don't like about it. The first one being is I don't have a create button in order to create additional records. I also don't have, the proper or very usable descriptions for my columns here. So it looks more like the internal field names that is exposed. So let's fix these pieces one at a time. The create button first. So in order to make the create button show up, what I need to do here is I need to add the OData draft enablement to this model. You can do that in a variety of ways. The easiest way that you can use is just add it into the maintenance item, set it to true, and once I save my OData enablement, you see that magically now in an automatic reload that the user interface does, the create button shows up. Let's hit the create button, enter a problem description, test 1, 2, 3. We create the object, fantastic. If we're going back to the main screen, you see that my record is showing up. I can also click in here, do an edit, say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, hit save. You see that with very, very little effort, in about 15 minutes from the time we started this, we already have an application, and a Fiori application with a data model, with an OData service that does a few things for us and already has sort of the basic functionality. Let's do a few other changes. We talked about the S4, the column headers here, as well as these the label fields. So let's go back into the annotations. Very easily identifiable, my label fields here. What you also, what some of you that are sort of the professionals in the room will tell me is that, well, you can just refer them to language independent fields. Yeah, absolutely, we can do all of that. Just given that I have not that much time, I will do this whole thing manually. And feel free to ask your questions in the chat window. So again, I will change here my labels to the problem description. And as soon as I refresh my page and go back to the main, you will see that S4 ID problem description is fixed. And once I enter my problem description, we also see that these labels are fixed. Now, the last thing I want to fix here, and there are other things that we can obviously adjust the description up here, some other information. The last thing I want to fix in this run through is I want to make sure is that we're setting this S4 ID field to read only because frankly nobody should write anything into it. The application itself will create a notification and populate this field with the S4 notification ID. So let's do that last modification. What do I need to do in order to change that? There are two areas here: the maintenance item and the UI line item and the UI field group. What I want to do is I want to pick the section for the field group and make a modification in here that says brackets add common field control is what we want, and then equals, I think it was pound read, it was pound colon, sorry, not equal, read only. There it is. So once I set this to read only, what I expect to happen is that, hang on, expect to happen was not this. Never mind, this was correct. What I wanted to do is, I just want to go back here, hit the create button again, and voila, my field is essentially grayed out. You don't see the gray, but it's not showing up. So it's a read-only entry for my S4 item. Again, just to double check this, last check here. I create the record, I go back to the previous screen, hit go, and there's my ID. So again, in the ultimate version, S4 ID will be populated. For right now, what we want to do is we want to finish essentially the second section of my super quick run through here. Consider the user interface discussion closed. and commit my user interface to the Git repo, so that I can now start with my third piece. What is my third piece? My third piece is the Cloud Foundry deployment. So again, I've created my data model, I've exposed my OData service, I put my user interface on top of it, even though locally, but that's sort of what I want. And now I want to take all of that to the BTP environment and really deploy it as a full-fledged BTP app. There are three pieces within step number 3 that I need to do. The first one is to add additional CAP artifacts to this mix. So the first one, the first command is cds add MTA, HANA, and XSUAA. So those are the three components that I want to add, or the three features that I want to add in here. And what you see on the left-hand side, you see that an MTA YAML has been created. My strong recommendation is dig into that MTA YAML, not into this particular one, but in the concept of the MTA YAML file, what you can do, how you can specify, how you specify bindings. It is sort of the core construct for any a little bit larger multi-target application that you have in the business technology platform. So that was step number 1. Step number 2 is the addition of the necessary Fiori deployment configuration. So in order to do that, I need to switch into another folder. I need to jump into the admin app folder, which you see here on the left-hand side. That's the folder that I want to use in order to add my Fiori configuration to. The command is Fiori add deploy config. So by doing that deployment of the deployment configuration here, you see that the first thing that happens, I have to answer some questions. My destination does not matter, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And yes, we want to override the existing configuration. So why did I specify does not matter? That value is only written into the access app JSON file. That is a file that is called the app router file. And the reason why I put a value in that does not matter is because I will override that file with the next tool that I have. That tool will make sure is that the additional information that will be put into the MTA YAML file and that access app file content, that value that I have in there for the destination, are actually matching up. So that's coming with the next tool, that the last tool that we're actually utilizing here. So at this point in time, you would usually use another Fiori generation tool that is called the application router generator. Now what I've found is that it's actually not working as I expect it to work. Now that might mean that, I just haven't tested it long enough, but at the end of the day, there are a few more things that I need to do for the application configuration, or for the deployment configuration, to make sense to me. And what I have done for myself is I've built a little tool for myself that I can run in order to compensate for that. Again, the content of it is pretty much the application router generator tool that the Fiori has, but the application generator tool right now doesn't seem to be able to update existing files, which I want it to do, but it just creates an additional new file somewhere in a directory that I don't want it to do. So what I did is I wrote a tool that I can call with this command, npx add Rizing CDS customer step by step tool. And again, I'm not suggesting to use anything like this as a good naming for an npm package, far from it, but I wanted to sort of keep it in line with an example that we had anyways. So what does this tool do? It does a whole slew of things, and the output essentially tells you what it does. It updates the MTA YAML file. Before that, it also updates every manifest file that you have in the system in order to add a few things into it. The MTA YAML file is extended and enhanced. And then last but not least, the route destination that is currently set to does not matter, remember, is now set to the value that is in the MTA file. So with that, everything is matching up and is looking pretty good. Okay, so with that being done, I should now have done all the pieces in order to allow me to build and deploy this particular project into the cloud and actually run it. Now, the only piece that I have not implemented yet, which we'll do after I start the deployment here, is the SAP integration. So before I do the SAP integration, let's add those files to my BTP deploy. So I commit these files, and then I will use my secondary window here in order to kick off my build and deployment. So the first thing you usually do is run a command that's called mbt build. So what that does, the mbt build command, is essentially taking the MTA YAML as a template and assembling a file that you can then deploy as a single file to the business technology platform. What's happening there? Once the file is uploaded to the business technology platform, it will allow you to, or it will disassemble and disaggregate the file and deploy the necessary configurations and components into the right locations. So that was my build process. Let's deploy it. So in order to deploy it, what you usually run is the cf deploy command. And then you reference the folder that is in the MTI archives folder. So this devtober _1000 mtar file is the one that I want to deploy. Here we go. So the cf deploy command, as I mentioned, is uploading the one file now. And once that is taken place and once the file has been completely received, it will start sort of taking that apart and deploying the necessary pieces. Obviously, you can find way more detailed information either in the help documentation, in some great sessions on developer.sap.com, or in a lot of videos that you can find on YouTube by the developer advocates and other SAP proponents. Good. So while this is going on, let me already work on the next part. So let's assume for a moment that this deployment works. And I will jump, I'll sort of break in my next section and I'll go back to show you the results here. But let's, for the sake of argument, say that this deployment is working. Because it takes a few minutes and I don't want to just sit here and wait for things to be deployed, I will already continuing on preparing my environment for the next part, which is the integration with SAP. So where do we start with integration with SAP? Usually you start at api.sap.com. api.sap.com allows me to look into the necessary APIs that I want to have available. In my case, I know that, or I hope that there is an OData v2 interface or even a v4 interface that allows me to interface with the maintenance notification. So in my case, I hit enter on maintenance, wait for the results to come up, and given that the Business Accelerator Hub is a little, takes a little bit today, eventually my maintenance notification shows up. As you see here, I'll click on it. And what I want to do is I'm looking for the maintenance or the OData specification in my backend system, the standard OData specification that is. So that is the API specification is the place to go. You see EDMX file here. I want to click on the download functionality. Now, this has just refreshed the screen because it logged me in. So let's do this one more time. Now you see that it downloaded the progress. Now I had another one in here. What I will do now is I will take that downloaded file, the EDMX file, and pull it into my project. So let me go to my second screen here, pull over the EDMX and just drop it into my folder. So here you see that the file name is op_API maintenance notification. So an XML format file represents the EDMX for that particular OData service. What I will do is I will do a rename on this file, just so it's a little bit cleaner. And the next thing I need to do is I need to import that into a structure that actually makes sense for CAP. So very easy path, you just specify CDS import and specify the EDMX file. And what that is doing, it is moving the EDMX file to a new directory called SRV external that now contains two files, the EDMX file itself and a CSN file that CAP is using in order to have essentially sort of an internal representation of the object model that the OData service represents. So that is my first part. What it also has done is it created, or it added and overrode some of the information in my package.json file. So here you see that now we have an entry that is called OP API maintenance notification. Think of that as a reference, a string reference to whatever comes below that. The first thing I want to do here to complement that is I want to specify a credentials section. The credentials section essentially allows my CAP application to identify either, as you see here, what URL, what username and password do I want to use, or in my case, what destination do I want to specify here. And in my case, it's not OP API maintenance notification. That's not the name of my destination. I don't know if you remember, there was I had this outlined in my repository, in my GitHub repository. So S4 VUI runtime is the place to go for me. So let's copy that, move that over here, and we're good to go. There's also I think there is a bracket missing. Okay, now we're good with the brackets. And then one more piece here is the path. So where do I find this particular service in my S4 system? In this case, should be SAP, OPU, OData, SAP, and then for me, it's not OP API maintenance notification, it's just API main notification without the SRV at the end. That's where it is located on our S4 system. It might be different in yours. All right, saving that file. So now I have done, a few things. Oh, there's a colon missing here as well. So now I've done a few of the things that I need to do in order to prepare for my integration. Let's take a quick breath. Let me just take a sip of water here. All right. So while we're doing all of this, the deployment on the right side has finished. So what I'm expecting to see is if I'm going into my sub account, and what you see here is our Rising Innovation sub account. Let me click on HTML5 applications. In here, in the HTML5 applications, I am assuming now that I will find an application, and you can find them in my case by just entering devtober. Here we have the application name, a little cryptic, the business solution, the active version. As soon as I click on that, the application should come up. But before the application itself comes up, it does what it's supposed to do, which is essentially prompting an SSO sign-on. So in my case, we have IAS specified, the SAP Identity Services, and it automatically validates, because I'm logged in as my Microsoft user through Office 365, that I'm good to go. So here we have the application. It looks exactly as I saw it in my local user interface. Let's try to create a problem description, test 1, 2, 3. Hit the create button. The object was successfully created, and if I go back here and hit the go button, you see that the maintenance item is stored. Now, what's the big difference? The big difference is that within 35 minutes, I've not only created an OData service, created my data model, created a Fiori user interface, deployed it successfully in the business technology platform so that you can use this application immediately in any work zone standard, work zone premium, or as you see it here, in our case, it's a work zone for HR, and make it available as a standard app in your system. So all of this in 35 minutes. So the last thing takes a little bit longer. The last thing we want is, and in order to finish this, we want to add the S4 ID in here and create a call to the S4 system. So a few more things I need to do. One thing I forgot in my package.json file. Let's kill this. There's another piece of the puzzle that is in here, which is called CSRF. CSRF is a protection approach that S4 uses, and by specifying that what happens in the background, the CAP application will go to SAP. I should say the underlying S4 cloud, not S4, the cloud SDK from SAP is going to SAP, requesting a token, and then using that token in the proper request to create the maintenance notification. So that's what CSRF equals 2 means. The second thing I need to do is I need to tie in my MTA YAML file, I need to tie the DevTower service, so my Node.js service that is essentially containing my CAP functionality, and adding the destination service as well as the connectivity service to this list, so that they have bindings to the destination service and the connectivity service. Especially the connectivity service is necessary if you want to go through the cloud connector and have a destination that points to your on-premise S4 system, as it does in my case. So the third piece here of this 4-part puzzle of integration is I need some additional libraries. I could go through and develop it and deploy it and then run into the error message. I don't want to do that. I want to add a few libraries that we need, that I already know we need, to my project. So the first one is a library that is called Cloud SDK Resilience. So that's my first one. The second one is called HTTP Client. And you can add all of these in one big swoop, but what I want to do is I want to create them individually just so that you see which ones I actually add to it. There's also documentation in the CAP documentation for connectivity. That allows you to add all of this in one. So what have we done? We have imported the EDMX definition. We have then made sure that my MTA YAML has the necessary bindings between my service that already has bindings to the database and the authentication service, but not yet to the destination and the connectivity service. And obviously they have to be defined, but I took care of that with my tool. And the last piece now is we need to write the implementation itself that takes the values and puts them into the right calls to SAP. So let's do that. Last piece. How do I define an implementation? I create a new file that has the same name as my CDS file, just with an extension JS. And yes, there are some other ways as well, but this is sort of the easiest way for now. The first thing I want to do is I want to create a reference to my CAP CDS package. That's what I've done. Then I want to do a module exports on a class that I'm going to write that I call admin service. And that admin service extends CDS application service. In my application service, I want to override, and this is correct or somewhat correct, I want to do an asynchronous override on the init method that is in that. And because what we need to do is we need to call the super constructor here with the arguments in it. So that is the framework where I usually start out from in order to build any kind of implementations. Obviously, you don't have to use classes if you don't want to. You can do a few other things, but this is what I want to do. So my first line usually is to define my SAP connection. So in my case, it's SAP connection equals await CDS connect to, not SAP, but here I want to reference that name, that string that you have in your package.json. In my case, it's OP API maintenance notification. So we're connecting to that. That creates my connection to SAP. As soon as I start up the the service. Now, the other thing that I want to do is I want to hook in into the before handler for before a maintenance item is created. So in my case, I want to say I want to have this structure, but rather than having an empty space here, I want to make sure is that I use the right string. So my entity is called maintenance item for the service. I want to put my maintenance item in here. So what this does, it allows me to hook in into the create process of a maintenance item, and this event is triggered before it is actually written into the database. So at that particular point, I want to do my call to SAP. Now, my call to SAP is, we're getting to that in a minute, but what I want to do is I want to first assemble my building block that I want to send to SAP. So let's call that data block. Initially, we're entering it, or we're initializing it empty. And then we want to fill certain informations, not the maintenance item, but the notification type with what we have. Well, actually, notification type is a static value. So I know that my maintenance notification should always, should always have the type 11. So the other value that I want to provide here is my notification text. And I want to set that to the value that I get from my problem description. So here now I have a block that I've created that is essentially just has two values in it, my notification type and my problem description. And as I mentioned, in your case, you might have way more complicated situation than this, but this is what I do. The other thing that I want to do is I want to create an insert query and say insert into not the main notification, but maintenance notification. And entry is data block, but it's not a single out data block. I want to specify that the data block as part of an array that I'm passing in. Why do I break out this insert query from the real call to the backend system? Well, because in the future, if I ever need to do something like this, console log insert query, I can actually document what's actually coming out. Let's do that right now. Here, this functionality now allows me to run and execute my insert query. So all I'm doing is connection.run, and I'm executing my query. And then the results is something I want to utilize in order to populate data S4. Hang on. Let me just make sure that I get this correct. So I want to fill the data S4 field with whatever I'm getting from my insert result as far as the maintenance notification. So in the maintenance notification, I will is contained the field, essentially the string that represents the maintenance notification ID, and that should be it. So now, obviously, this scenario only works for create at the moment, but you could do the same thing for updates, etc. It will kick in, and what I will do now is I will start the deployment process, npm run build and npm, and I'll explain that in a minute, deploy. All right, so what have I just done? Rather than doing mbt build to a folder and mbt and cf deploy, some of the tools have already created additional information or additional scripts in the package. So what you see here is you see a build script that does essentially a cleanup of the file and does an MBT build, but with a particular archive name. And then this deploy is taking that archive name and does a CF deploy. So by stringing them together, I essentially don't have to wait for myself to realize that the deployment is or the build is complete, but I string it together and combine build and deploy into one. So excellent piece of work here, if I might say so myself. So what has happened is I have added the necessary pieces for my integrated deployment. A few other things, what I probably should do is I should take the resource folder and add it into my git ignore. I think there was something up here that the distribution. But again, doesn't really matter for us right now. What I want to show you, and I hope it's going to work, is the outcome of this. Now, another thing that, while I have a few seconds here, I can highly recommend, if you haven't used it before, is the CF logs command. Now, what is CF logs all about? CF logs allow you to take the console output of your microservice, in my case, the Node.js service, and pop it right into your terminal. So for me, what is interesting is CF logs devtober srv. That is my Node.js service. And what you will see here is that it should come up and give me all the outputs of the container being completely rebuilt and refreshed. It's still uploading the information, and now you see down here on the right side, in this window here, you see what's happening on my side on the MTA deployer. Up here in this window on the top left, you see actually the microservice, the exercise the microservice is going to about being packaged up, spun up, and you can also find all the error messages. So if you ever looking or trying to investigate what's going on with your service, what has happened, this CF logs command is an invaluable piece. Now you can run this either in the let's call it interactive mode that you have here, that I find very, very helpful. But sometimes you have to look at stuff after the fact. So CF logs also has a parameter that is called, I think it's -- recent, that allows you to list sort of the historical outputs in here. So again, if you've used it before, you already know what I'm talking about. If not, certainly a very, very, very helpful tool on an ongoing basis to figure out what's going on. All right, my container became healthy. It's still finishing up some deployment pieces, but let's get my browser back up here. So my deployment is done. Now let's see what happens. There might be still an error somewhere that we need to debug, but we still have 13 minutes left, so I think I'm doing pretty well. Let's just refresh this app just in order to make sure that nothing new came in, but it shouldn't really matter. What you see already on the refresh, I don't know if you could tell, but in the background, something is already happening, so a request already came in. Let's hit the create button, enter a problem description, and say, hello SAP, and hit create. At this point in time, sometimes you see that things blow up, and you have to go through the CF logs deployment, either into the deployment log, into the CF logs output here. What you see, luckily in my case, is that the S4 ID was populated just as I expected and hoped to expect. But also you see here that the query that I output to the command line is also showing up here with the object. Now the object is not output, but that's fair game. Could use another console command that is better. Good. 12 minutes left. Let's switch back to our standard piece. So what have we just done? In less than 60 minutes, we actually still have 10 minutes left. We built an OData model, or a model, data model for an OData service. We assembled an OData service. We first made it available locally. In the next part, we put a user interface on top of that service in order to give it some interactivity and make it user friendly. The third part of the exercise was to deploy everything to the business technology platform into the right components. So what we didn't go into is that the user interface is deployed in the HTML repository. The service is deployed as a Node.js service. There are some other services of the BTP, namely the XSUA service, the HANA Cloud service, the destination service, the connectivity service, that we've all bound to my application. And then last but not least, this has created a notification in an S4 HANA on-premise system that is connected through the Cloud Connector. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for the opportunity to showcase this. And as I mentioned before, we're answering questions in the chat. Keep them coming. And if you want to get hold of me or get in touch with me, my email address is martin.stenzig@rising.com. You can also find me on Twitter and on LinkedIn. So with that, thanks again, and you guys have a great day.